Hello and welcome. I am Shannon Clifford, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mesa Verde Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us today. We always invite you to drop a line in the chat box and tell us where you're joining us from. We love to know that information. So I am actually in Arvada, Colorado, and I know that Monica is joining us from Sedona, Arizona. Is that correct, Monica?
Well, I'm still in the office, so I'm down in Camp Verde right now.
Perfect. And Dr. Gulliford is joining us from the Durango area. So thank you all. Rob Elliott is also at Camp Verde. And Doug Bacon is joining us from Longmont, Colorado, and Bonnie from Durango. Thanks everyone for sharing. We love to see where you're joining us from. Please, Edmonds, Washington. Welcome, John. We will get started right at 4 o'clock. We like to start letting you all in a little early so that we can definitely respect your time. We have Marion joining us from Rochester, New York, and Shirley Cloud Lane from Monticello or Monticello. I might be butchering that. I apologize. Utah. We have Todd from Denver. Welcome all. We are very, very happy that you are joining us today. We did have over 100 people register for today's webinar, so I imagine some people will be joining as we go along. That is not a problem. In the meantime, if you want to just drop us a line about where you're joining us from, we'd love to share that. I know that here in Arvada, it is frigidly cold, but we didn't get any snow. And I'm hearing in the eastern parts of Colorado, they are having blizzard conditions. So it's always interesting to know what's going on around. Meredith is joining us from Parker. Susan is joining us from Miami. I don't think she's worried about the frigid temperatures. Welcome, Susan. Again, we're just about a minute out from the start of this webinar. Thank you all for joining us. And we always love to know where you're joining us from. So there's still time if you want to drop us a line in the chat. On your screen, you're seeing the cover of Bear's Ears, Landscape of Refuge and Resistance by Dr. Gulliford. He'll be discussing a lot of what he learned and is happy to share about Bear's Ears and the time and research he has done to bring this webinar to you. So if you're interested in learning more about his book, please check the chat box. We'll be dropping the link to purchase that book on Amazon, or you can always purchase it via Utah Press. It looks like Tracy is here from Denver. Tracy, I bet you're as cold as I am today. All righty, it's 4 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'm Shannon Clifford, Executive Director of the Mesa Verde Foundation, and I'm wanting to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm just going to take a quick second to introduce Monica Buckle, who has graciously been moderating these webinars since the beginning. So thank you, Monica, for doing that. We always appreciate you. And Monica is also a member of our board of directors, as is Dr. Andy Gulliford. So you've got the experts on with you today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Monica. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Shannon, and welcome everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful holiday season so far. And Shannon, I love your beautiful winter scene of luminaries behind you. It makes me want to be at the park. I have a Sedona snow scene behind me. We woke up to 3 inches of snow this morning. So it's nice when you see snow come to the high desert of Arizona. With that said, I'm so excited for today's webinar, the last one of the year. We are most fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Gulliford presenting for a second time. Dr. Gulliford is a professor of history and environmental science at Fort Lewis College, a Mesa Verde Foundation board member, an acclaimed historian, and an award-winning writer. Today's talk, as Shannon said, is Bears Ears, Landscape of Refuge and Resistance, the Mesa Verde of the 21st century. Andy will walk us through his new book that discusses how the ancestral Puebloans did not just live at Mesa Verde. They lived across the greater San Juan Basin, including at Yucca House National Monument, Chaco National Historical Park, Aztec National Monument, and at Bears Ears National Monument. The Mesa Verde Foundation had an exciting year, many thanks to all our members, donors, and viewers like you. Dr. Gulliford recently led a group of Mesa Verde Foundation supporters on a 4-day behind-the-scenes tour of Mesa Verde National Park with the Zuni fiber artist and native scholar, Christopher Lewis. It was an incredible experience for all who participated. We are already looking forward to next year's fall tour. If you're interested in participating in next year's tour, which will be held in October 2023, please reach out to Shannon, our executive director, at the email address in the chat box. The foundation diligently works to support Mesa Verde National Park in its conservation, preservation, education, and maintenance needs. We can only accomplish this with your support. From now till the end of the year, Alpine Bank is matching year-end gifts up to $5,000. This means that your year-end donation will go further to support our work. If you'd like to make a year-end tax-deductible donation, please visit our website, mesaverdefoundation.org, or call Shannon at 303-321-3120. With utmost gratitude, I would also like to thank the park superintendent, Casey Cook Collins, for her invaluable support. Now, circling back to our guest speaker, Dr. Gulliford. Dr. Gulliford has written many books and has been the recipient of the Colorado Book Award on numerous occasions, as well as Arizona Book Awards and New Mexico Book Awards. Dr. Gulliford was awarded the National Individual Volunteer Award from the U.S. Forest Service for outstanding contribution to America's natural and cultural resources. He writes a weekly column about the Southwest for the Durango Herald, which he has done for the past 15 years. His latest book about Bears Ears National Monument can be purchased via Amazon in the link provided in the chat box. I know it'll make a perfect holiday gift. We'll take questions at the end of the presentation. However, with that said, if you have a specific question pertaining to one of the slides you're going to see in Andy's talk, or one of the images that relates to a slide that he's speaking about, please message me in the chat box and I'll prompt Andy with the question. That way, at the end, we don't have to go through his PowerPoint to get to the specific slide. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Gulliford.
Well, thank you, Monica. Thank you, Shannon. Yes, my Bears Ears book took about 20 years to research and write. And in that time, of course, I've spent a lot of time at Mesa Verde, researching it, learning about it, and leading tours. So I think it's going to be fun for our listeners and viewers to think about that comparison. So the first national park was Yellowstone in 1872. Mesa Verde becomes the world's first cultural park in 1906, actually June of 1906. And that same month and that same year, Theodore Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act. And the Antiquities Act is an extraordinary law, probably never get through Congress today. It's only a page and a half long. It's an amazing law, but it basically says two things. Number one, it's the first law in the world to protect indigenous burials and requiring permits for any kind of excavation on Native American sites on public lands. The second part of the law, and this is important to our topic tonight, is that the president can declare objects of, quote, historic and scientific interest as national monuments. And here's the kicker, without an act of Congress. And, quote, in the smallest acreage possible. Well, Teddy never did anything in a small way, never. And once he got that law, he had a lot of fun with it. He declared the first national monument at Devil's Tower in Wyoming. He did Chaco as a national monument. He did a variety of national monuments, 18 in total, and the Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon, however, he did at 800,000 acres. And the politicians in Arizona, which was still a territory and not a state, just went apoplectic about that, took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court responded in a very brief paragraph and said, yes, he's the president. If that's the smallest acreage possible, then that's what it should be. So that law is important because Bears Ears is a national monument designated by President Obama, not through an act of Congress. So we're going to talk about that. Mesa Verde is 1906. Bears Ears is 2016. There are numerous connections and comparisons between Bears Ears and Mesa Verde. The most important thing, though, is it was living space, cultural space, human space for ancestral Puebloans who inhabited both Mesa Verde and Bears Ears simultaneously. And so really the best book on this is Florence Lister's book. It's called Troweling Through Time, the First Century of Mesa Verdean Archaeology. So note that title. It's not Mesa Verde archaeology, it's Mesa Verdean archaeology, because she saw it as a larger world, which indeed it is. There's just so many similarities. It's great. In both cases, the impact of pot hunting or site looting encouraged both Mesa Verde as a park and then the Antiquities Act itself. The Wetherill brothers explored both areas. Obviously, they were there for Mesa Verde, but they also explored extensively in Bears Ears. The botanist Alice Eastwood studied plants both at Mesa Verde and Bears Ears. Where things are different and why Bears Ears is the Mesa Verde of the 21st century is because Bears Ears is primarily BLM land, not National Park Service, though it embraces and surrounds Natural Bridges National Monument, which is a unit of the National Park Service. Mesa Verde is 52,000 acres. Bears Ears is 1.35 million acres. It's bigger than the Grand Canyon. Mesa Verde is administered by the National Park Service. Bears Ears is a combination of the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, and the National Park Service. Mesa Verde was really campaigned for and encouraged by two women, which is a great story unto itself, for Mesa Verde to become a national park. 5 tribes encouraged Bears Ears to become a national monument, the first time in American history in which tribes sought to use the Antiquities Act to gain protections for a sacred landscape. And I guarantee you it won't be the last time. The sites are similar, although Mesa Verde has very large cliff dwellings, and the ancestral Puebloan culture was similar, if not identical, but the landscape is decidedly different. Bears Ears is a geological overlook. It's a place, but it's also a specific place. So imagine, the 2 ears on a bear. There is that place, Bears Ears, but it's also a landscape. It's an entire plateau. You can see it from 100 miles away. Actually, you can see it from Mesa Verde. And when I do tours, when we go on Wetherill Mesa, there's a couple places where you can see the 2 little Bears Ears sticking up far to the west. Bears Ears has large cliffs, canyons, mesas, and buttes, including Cedar Mesa, which is a large expanse in Bears Ears with canyons dropping off to the east and to the west, all the way down to the San Juan River, just like Mesa Verde is close to the Mancos River. Comb Wash is there, lots of other place names. Florence Lister wrote in her book, Troweling Through Time, quote, Cedar Mesa is a place of untrammeled natural beauty whose remoteness has secured a prehistoric microcosm from large-scale ravages of modern exploitation. The Cedar Mesa landscape is much like that of Mesa Verde. It was a major staging area for those at the dawn of Puebloan history. The Mesa Verde Foundation, the group that is sponsoring this webinar, supports Mesa Verde National Park. The Bears Ears Partnership supports Bears Ears National Monument. Chris Lewis, who was a great fella to work with on our tour of Mesa Verde in October 2022. We'll be doing it together in October 2023. Chris from Zuni Pueblo is on the Bears Ears Partnership Board of Directors. So there's lots of connections there. Mesa Verdean clans inhabited Bears Ears, which also had another ethnic group, the Kayenta Anasazi. Nobody's exactly sure how many languages or how many ethnic groups were in Bears Ears. Both places, Mesa Verde and Bears Ears, were abandoned by about 1300 AD. I'm not an archaeologist, I'm an historian, but I'm an historian studying 11,000 years of Bears Ears history, trying to make connections from the past to the present. And here's a big one. Because Bears Ears is BLM, it's a radically different experience. There are no signed trails, no rangers. Well, that you're going to see. There's two for about 3 million acres in San Juan County, Utah. No interpretive signs, dirt parking if you're lucky, much smaller habitation sites, but a vastly larger number of rock art panels because of the available sandstone. In fact, experts have told me that they think there's enough rock art near Bluff, Utah to have a World Heritage Site just with the Bears Ears rock art. Mesa Verde itself is a World Heritage Site. So Bears Ears is in many ways a wilderness experience compared to Mesa Verde's asphalt trails to the most famous sites. I'm hoping that Mesa Verde supporters will be intrigued to make larger connections with the ancestral Puebloan world across the four corners. So a note on the federal agencies: national parks are always created by an act of Congress. Only God can make a tree, only Congress can make a national park. But as I just said, the president can set aside national monuments. So Mesa Verde is part of the National Park Service. Bears Ears is part of the Bureau of Land Management National Conservation Lands. So there's a parallel system. It's young, it's got a ways to go and grow, but for the BLM, it's called National Conservation Lands. So it's similar to the Park Service's National Park Service. The other interesting thing is that BLM units, I think, will have tribal co-management. And it's similar to the Park Service where Mesa Verde consults with tribes, but this is really different in terms of having tribes right there at the table all the time on the management plan. So here's a quote from former Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, who helped create the National Conservation Landscape System, now called National Conservation Lands. He thought a lot about ancestral Puebloans. Here in Colorado, he helped create Canyons of the Ancients National Monument. This is what he said about Mesa Verde at the University of Denver Law School. This is Bruce Babbitt. Quote, Mesa Verde is, I think it in many ways is the most evocative of all our national parks, because there's something about being on that landscape, a palpable sense of the presence of our ancestors and the magical way that they lived on that land is absolute resonance with the landscape and the life on the land. It is just really incredible. I can't describe it. Well, he can't describe it, but Secretary Babbitt went on to really help preserve and protect other areas like Canyons of the Ancients, but he left them with the BLM. They did not get transferred to the Park Service. So here's a couple of quotes about Bears Ears. This is a cowboy description from San Juan County, Utah, 1938. What is the area? Quote, a lot of rocks, a lot of sand, more rocks, more sand, and wind to blow it away. So if you were riding a horse out there looking for cows, you didn't think much of the ancestral Puebloan landscape. Now, what did President Obama think? Here's his description of Bears Ears. Quote, rising from the center of the southeastern Utah landscape and visible from every direction are twin buttes so distinctive that in each of the native languages of the region, their name is the same: Hunnisquat, Shashja, Quiagutu, Nukavichi, Anch, Anasali, or Bears Ears. For hundreds of generations, native peoples lived in the surrounding deep sandstone canyons, desert mesas, and meadow mountaintops, which constitutes one of the densest and most significant cultural landscapes in the United States. So that's from the original Bears Ears Proclamation in December, right about this time of 2016. So San Juan County, Utah is the state's, quote, Indian county. The county itself is 5 million acres. There's probably 100,000 archaeological sites, a population of only 16,000 people, and an original Mormon mission to aid and convert the natives. So Mormon history, very much a part of Bears Ears and very much a part of San Juan County, Utah. One of the things I like to say about San Juan County, which is 92% public, state, federal, or tribal land. There's only 8% private property in the whole county. San Juan County, Utah has 2 stoplights, but one is blinks, so you don't really have to stop, and the other one is a full 4-way stop. So 1 stoplight for about 5 million acres. That's pretty remote. Very different from Mesa Verde, close to Durango, close to Cortez, and right next to Mancos. Women were very much involved in starting Mesa Verde. That's in Dwayne Smith's book, Women to the Rescue. And of course, the standard history of Mesa Verde for Anglo exploration and understanding begins with Richard Wetherill and Charlie Mason in December of 1888. Well, Richard Wetherill spent a lot of time in Bears Ears, and I go into that in my book. There's also a great book called about cowboy archaeology and real interesting descriptions about reverse archaeology, finding what is in museums and then where did it come from. A great book by one of the co-authors is Fred Blackburn. A famous botanist, Alice Eastwood, connects both Mesa Verde and Bears Ears. The American West has always had extraordinary women, but few of them have stopped to pick the flowers. Well, one of them was Alice Eastwood. She names 125 plant species. She has genera, plants named for her. In her lifetime, she wrote 310 scientific articles, named 395 plant species, had 17 species named for her. At age 68, on a botany trip in California, she walked 20 miles the first day and 10 miles on day 2. What an amazing woman. She is the botanist in the Denver Public Library who meets Gustav Nordenskjöld and then gives him a letter of introduction to the Wetherills, a very important part of Mesa Verde history. But she also worked in Bears Ears, and she collected plants in Bears Ears with Richard Wetherill's brother. So Richard is the one with Charlie Mason who sees and names Cliff Palace. In 1892, Alice goes all the way down across Utah from basically where the Denver and Rio Grande crossed Utah on horseback into Bears Ears collecting plants, goes to Monticello, from Moab down to Monticello, down to Bluff, even picks plants in Courthouse Wash, now part of Arches National Park, Combe Wash and Butler Wash and Bears Ears. What an amazing person. So she is shared between Mesa Verde and Bears Ears. Mesa Verde is so important because it's really the confluence of the first archaeological park, automobiles, and middle-class tourism. Mesa Verde and the fact that the road to Mesa Verde on the San Juan River flooded out in 1911 is why the State Highway Department built the new Highway 160 way up on the top of Wolf Creek Pass. So it's always dry, might be snow covered, but it's not underwater, it's not flooded by the San Juan River. In Bears Ears, there were no roads for decades. and it's still no easy access. So that's partly why it's a 21st century Mesa Verde, because people want to go out there with their four-wheel drives. They want to go out there sometimes with ATVs on remote roads. They want to see it and explore it. And it's that self-exploration, very different from the ranger-led tours at Mesa Verde. Another great connection is the Cedar Mesa Perishables Project. These are specific artifacts that were dug up and wound up in amazing places. In 1893, at the Chicago World's Fair, one of the most well-visited exhibits is on cliff dwellers. And it's a stucco kind of plaster of Paris structure, but it contains original artifacts. And it's that collection which was bought and purchased by the Colorado Historical Society, now History Colorado. So that goes back, that ties into both places also. And great new research now happening in Bears Ears. Dr. Lori Webster writes, quote, there were roughly 5,000 artifacts taken out of alcoves in Southeast Utah, and 4,000 are perishable items of wood, feathers, and textiles, including sandals, baskets, and blankets. So this Cedar Mesa Perishables Project goes to look at artifacts at Mesa Verde and compares them with artifacts from Bears Ears. Although Bears Ears really doesn't have a collections facility, there is one at Edge of the Cedars State Park and Museum in Blanding. It's an excellent facility, and there are very important artifacts there from Bears Ears. So science goes on, research goes on, and it's great to have these connections. Chris Lewis works with that. He's a fiber artist and basket weaver from Zuni, and it's great talking to him. When we did our tour in October 2022, he gave us a fabulous discussion on sandals and sandal comparisons. So that's another connection. All of these artifacts are in long closed drawers. They came out of Bears Ears. They wound up in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, the Museum of Peoples and Culture at Brigham Young University, the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian, the Phoebe Hearst Museum at UC Berkeley, University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia, etc. And with white cotton gloves, Chris takes them out, looks at them, and says, quote, inanimate objects still have a life, still have a soul. When I go through the collections, I talk to them. I say, I'm sorry you have to be locked in the dark, but we can come and visit you, he explains. Another difference, though, between Bears Ears and Mesa Verde is as I said, the rock art. So the cliff dwellings are much smaller. The rock art is much longer, much more expansive, and it includes, are you ready, an 11,000-year-old mammoth. A mammoth. Pleistocene rock art. This is near the San Juan River. It's actually near a campground, Sand Island Campground, administered by the BLM. There's lots of rock art there, including some really fabulous 5,000-year-old rock art, a different style called Glen Canyon Linear. But there's this one thing that I think is a mammoth, and people are starting to see that. Was a hot topic in Pleistocene Coalition News. Experts from France have looked at the pictures. And so how exciting is that to have as part of Bears Ears, part of the predecessors to the Ancestral Puebloans, the hunter-gatherers, Paleolithic hunter-gatherers who did a mammoth as a piece of rock art. Pretty exciting. One of the best rock art panels is the procession panel. Chris Lewis thinks it's really a migration panel, which is possible way up on the top of Combe Ridge. That's a fabulous hike. And I can only stare and wonder when I'm there, caught up in the monument, realizing that where this panel stands near the top of the ridge is one of the few crossover places between drainages. Perhaps a group of Ancestral Puebloans came up the same incline I did, climbed over and around the same rocks, stood beneath the panel, created to honor and remember them. So lots of wilderness experiences in Bears Ears, You've got to know where you are. You've got to go back and find the car. Your cell phone's not going to work. You've got to be responsible. So one of the interesting things about this National Conservation Land System is they're not going to build anything in the monuments. Very different from the Park Service model. So if you're going to have a visitor center, it's in a small town close to the monument. And there isn't one yet for Bears Ears, but there is one that's started by a different group. It's called the Bears Ears Education Center, and it's in an old bar. It's in an old saloon, and it's a pretty interesting place to visit. So in Bears Ears, you're not going to see rangers with their, great hats. It's a really different experience. And the Bears Ears Education Center is the old silver dollar bar. So this is a different kind of experience. I think it's unique in terms of letting folks know more about Ancestral Puebloans. A whole new generation of hikers trying to avoid crowds, trying to find wilderness values of silence, solitude, and darkness, can find it in these national conservation lands. And Bears Ears is a great example. I want to conclude my spoken comments, and then we'll go to the slides here with a section called Doing the Bears Ears Shuffle. Unfortunately, when Congress does something, it's pretty definite. In Utah right now, there's a Bears Ears Shuffle because Congress didn't vote for Bears Ears. It was established by executive order. The state of Utah is now suing the Biden administration. So the Obama administration established Bears Ears. The Trump administration shrunk it by 85%, although they kept Comb Ridge, the Shasha unit. The Biden administration restored Bears Ears, plus an interesting 11,000 acres that President Trump added, and I'm still trying to figure out how that came about. And now the state of Utah is suing the Biden administration over the size of the monument and the way it was created. So unfortunately, there's still some uncertainties, and we'll see where that goes. But right now I want to switch to slides. Before I do, though, this is from the President Biden's proclamation, and I completely agree with this. Bears Ears helped inspire the Antiquities Act. And this is what he said in his proclamation. The Bears Ears landscape is not just a series of isolated objects, but is itself an object of historic and scientific interest requiring protection under the Antiquities Act. Bears Ears is a sacred land of spiritual significance, a historic homeland, and a place of belonging for indigenous people from the Southwest. Bears Ears is a living, breathing landscape that, owing to the area's rich environment and overall remoteness, as well as the building techniques which its inhabitants employed, retains remarkably and spiritually significant evidence of indigenous use and habitation since time immemorial. And those are two really important words, time immemorial. And I think that's great. Bears Ears was at the edge of the ancestral Puebloan culture. It was the northwest edge. Now it's in the center of this huge debate over public lands, but I'm really glad it's a national monument. So I'm going to switch to some slides now.
Well, Andy, once you get your slides going, we actually have a question from
Sure.
Steve Parker.
Okay.
And so his question is, hi, Andrew, thanks for doing this. You used the term Kayenta Anasazi. We were hiking in Canyon de Chelly, and our guide also used that term. Who were those inhabitants?
So Canyon de Chelly is another interesting place. It's a national monument under the National Park Service. I think, and it's a little unclear, but I think the Kayenta Anasazi are the Hopi, the true Hopi ancestors. So Bears Ears is so big at 1.35 million acres. There are definitely Mesa Verdean people, but when Mesa Verde is left, where do folks go? We now know they went to Zuni, they went to Acoma, they went to Hopi. but a lot of Mesa Verdeans went down along the Rio Grande River to those pueblos. And so the language patterns, Kiris, Tewa, Tiwa, Toa, those are still spoken along the Rio Grande. So the groups that went the other way, I think those are the Kayenta Anasazi, Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and their architecture is really different. It's not as formal. I think they lived in more remote places. They didn't aggregate as much as the Mesa Verdeans. All right, so here we go. And those are the Bears Ears. So as I said, Bears Ears is both a physical place and then an area. Here's our new sign. I just photographed this, let's see, Sunday. Great to see it. One of the interesting things about national conservation lands, and notice on the bottom, so the Park Service is in the Department of the Interior with the BLM, but because part of this is Forest Service, you also have U.S. Department of Agriculture. But each national monument sign is a little different, and it can for national conservation lands, which is a great. So you've got a logo you understand, but each sign, wherever you're going to go, Canyons of the Ancients National Monument, Black Rock, High Rock Desert in Nevada, the signs are going to look different. So for those of us who know Mesa Verde history, this is a pretty famous document. This is Gustav Nordenskjöld's telegram home. He has been arrested for digging artifacts at Mesa Verde. And those of us who are parents can really appreciate this telegram. 6 words. Imagine getting this from your son or daughter 3,000 miles away. You can read it. Much trouble, some expense, no danger. So he doesn't explain what's happened. This becomes a very international incident, and it's one of the real precursors to establishing both the Antiquities Act and Mesa Verde as a national park. Richard Wetherill, the man who is between Mesa Verde and Bears Ears. He also digs at Chaco Canyon, as is in fact killed at Chaco Canyon. His grave is at Chaco Canyon. I mentioned that, and what comes up before that in my Bears Ears book. So this is a really interesting figure. There is a book about him, a really good biography called Anasazi, which was his nickname by the Navajos. So this is exciting. So Edgar L. Hewitt was an archaeologist, and he basically writes the Antiquities Act. This is a map, and you see Canyon de Chelly is in here. Every little dot is a ruin. And this is from his original document to Congress stating there are all these sites out there. We really need a law to protect them. So Bluff here, notice the proximity between Bluff and Mesa Verde up at the top, and look at all those dots following the drainages. So Comb Wash, Butler Wash, Cottonwood Wash, all those dots. And so this is an important map because it shows the amount of cultural, basically stewardship and site distribution for the Ancestral Puebloans. Here's a little closer focus just on the Bluff area. And everywhere there was water, there were sites. Now, this is interesting. The locals in Durango, in conjunction with Colorado politicians in the 1890s, tried to push the Southern Utes out of Colorado. So the Southern Ute Reservation is long and relatively narrow. It's south of Durango, goes all the way to the New Mexico border. But Durango businessmen unethically tried to remove the Southern Utes, and this is where they wanted to put them. They wanted to put them over in San Juan County, Utah, would have taken up most of Bears Ears. So how interesting would that have been? This is Tank Mesa, part of Bears Ears. Lots of room to hike, lots of room to explore. This is a site I found from Tank Mesa. I always hike with my pups, and I was with my great Labrador. I had a Springer Spaniel lab, and we found this site. Now it's hard to see because it blends in so well. So look onto the far left side of the image. And we found this site from miles away. I found it with binoculars. And then it took me about 3.5 months to actually see it, get to it. Pretty amazing. This is a refuge site. If you look above the ruined walls, there's no smoke. There's no cinders. It may or may not have had a roof. This was a place where you came in times of danger. And you can see here, not only is it a narrow, steep, dangerous ledge, but you could have had an archer here defending it. So obviously sites at Mesa Verde are defensible, but it's very apparent to see that defensive architecture at Bears Ears. This is the beautiful McLeod Canyon near Moon House. It's below Moon House. You've got to climb down this and then up to get to Moon House. There's Moon House in the shadow. It gets light, but it's pretty much, you know, tucked back on that ledge. This is a fabulous site, limited to 20 or 25 people a day, accessible through recreation.gov. And hopefully we'll be there in April if we can get the reservations, which I think we can. So Moon House, and then the question about the Kayenta Anasazi. See the difference in the doorways? So Kayenta Anasazi did more of a rounded door, almost what's called a horseshoe collar door. It still had a lintel, still had wood across the top, but it wasn't a rectangle. And Mesa Verdean architecture is more formal. This is really dramatic. This is at Moon House. You've got Mesa Verdean architecture on the right, and then this other structure, which looks much more informal, that's Kayenta Anasazi. So it's a different group with different standards, and they're in Bears Ears. So this is Moon House, some of the pictographs there. The inside, and you can no longer go in these rooms, but you can photograph them. So the photos you're about to see some of them cannot be taken again. You can photograph this, you can get into this space, but not into the rooms themselves. Look at this great mural. So this is like an inner courtyard. And obviously there are courtyards at Longhouse, Balcony House, Spruce Tree House, but not with this protective wall that the public can get to. And then you can see the soot. And then look at all the little dots above the white plaster. Those are thumbprints. And this is the moon. This is why it's called Moon House. And notice it's a negative moon, not a positive moon. So that's really different. And then look at the thumbprints above. One of the great rock art sites is in Bears Ears, not too far, maybe 1.5 miles from the sign I showed you. And a very dense rock art panel on a cliff edge, including this figure with sort of the big hands and feet that I think is a proto-Kachina and early Kachina. Also, you'll see long crook-necked staffs. 75 of those were found in one spot at Chaco Canyon. Again, proof of the Ancestral Puebloan movement across the vast San Juan landscape. This is, I think, the proto-Kachina figure. Offering areas near the same panel where these cupules have been carved in the sandstone, and you would make a blessing with sacred cornmeal. If you wanted another child or were having trouble conceiving or saying a prayer of some sort, this is a rare panel. The top of the comb, I love the top of the comb. This is really one of my favorite places. You don't get too close to the edge, but it is magnificent. The La Salle Mountains are to the north of this. These are the Blues or the Abajos. And then Monument Valley is off to the west. So this part of Bears Ears, I think will always remain. Whatever happens with the boundaries, President Obama declared this, President Trump left it alone, President Biden reconstituted the entire 1.35 million acres. But this, for a few years there, was known as the Shashja Unit. And so from the top of Cedar Mesa, you can look out way across at the Comb, and then all of this canyon country to explore. There are 7 wilderness study areas in Bears Ears, which will now mean that they'll basically act as wilderness. There are ruins where there are water sources. And again, notice, unlike Mesa Verde, see the rubble? Well, some of these may have been stabilized, but they certainly haven't been, quote, restored the way they have at Mesa Verde. So it's very much a feeling of exploration. This one has been stabilized. This is Monarch Cave, discovered and named in 1892 by the Illustrated American Exploring Expedition. I write about them in my book on Bears Ears. The Illustrated American Exploring Expedition was part of Illustrated American, which was an early competitor with National Geographic. It didn't survive, but an interesting expedition. They had very high expectations and found some great sites, but did not achieve everything they thought they would. So in the old days, you could actually go in Monarch Cave. Now you can get about this far, but there's a little chain barrier, so you can't go further. Rock art, hand paintings, very much a part of the Bears Ears experience. Notice this, the positive prints are the solid ones in kind of burnt brown, little green, and then the negative handprint is in white. And I love negative handprints. They're so dramatic. These are people talking to us around the world. Handprints always mean I come in peace. You know, I don't have a weapon. I'm a human. I mean, they're just great. And I love children's handprints, children's footprints I've seen in certain places. So here we are at Mesa Verde, and I want everybody to figure out, where are they? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's Balcony House. So this is a kiva. You see the ranger. We're standing on top of the kiva. I'm photographing this from the other side. But notice it's not a complete circle. It indents. So I'm sorry I didn't have a wide enough lens to get the rest of the image, but basically this is called a keyhole kiva. And you see the stone comes up, and then you see that sort of outer shape. So if you think about an old key lock on a door, that's a keyhole. Well, this is a restored, stabilized keyhole kiva at Mesa Verde. There's one at Bears Ears, unrestored. But you see that same indentation. These are Mesa Verdean people 100 miles apart. And actually probably closer than that, really, if you did it in a straight line. So this is the beauty of Bears Ears. It's not changed much. All you got to do is figure out how to hike in. You're seeing what a Mesa Verdean visitor would have seen 100 years ago. With the sweep of the canyon and the arch of the alcove. Climbing around gets interesting. Where there aren't trails, sometimes you're just walking on sandstone. That's a downward route to this place called Two-Story House. And here, notice the basically foundation. Look at the bottom. That's all built up. That's a whole lot of weight. And those walls are in great shape. Again, Mesa Verdean people, because those are pretty good rectangles for the doorways. It's hard to find any artifacts in Mesa Verde sites, but you can. Chris Lewis found one when we did our tour. This is a piece of cordage for what would have been a turkey feather blanket. Rock art, this was chalked in. We never do that anymore. This was probably done in the 40s or 50s to help photograph it. This is in Grand Gulch. This is a stabilized BLM site called Perfect Kiva with a ladder. You can climb down into it. This is another shot of Perfect Kiva. And this is the Brain. This is a local name in the Bluff area for rock outcropping. And as you're climbing up into Bears Ears, you go through that magnificent set of pinon juniper down in the middle of the photograph. And then you kind of edge around to the right, and you're on your way to the procession panel, all these views behind it. And then it is an extraordinary piece of rock art. The arrows that you see on the far left aren't really arrows. Those are atlatl darts. So this is even earlier. This is Basket Maker. This is pre-Ancestral Puebloan, or right at that time switch between Basket Maker 3, perhaps, although I think this whole site is Basket Maker 2. But look at all the figures going to some sort of event, and that event is a circle, probably a great kiva, possibly even in Comb Wash. Another rock art site, this is called the Wolfman panel. If you look, there's a wolf print on the right. Also, the two sort of light bulb looking things are called lobe circles. That's a religious symbol of some sort. Pretty standard along the San Juan River drainage, but not found at Mesa Verde. Really interesting, fabulous piece of rock art where he almost seems to float in time and space. And then look at the crane. And the crane has its wings open for the sun to dry rain or cold or snow. I've only seen that once in my life. I've seen a heron do that. That is a beautiful piece of rock art. So plenty of canyons to explore, very different. Mesa Verde, like other national park units, has limited access, ranger at the front gate. Not so with Bears Ears. There's lots of ways in and lots of ways out. This is a fabulous site. This is called Eagle's Nest. It's on a very steep cliff, and maybe there's a way down. I think there's some Moki pockets, Moki steps here. Very dangerous. The IAEE named it, and that's how steep it is. So if you look on the top right, it's in that alcove, and you would never want to slip because that would be the end. So even though these sites are not as big as Mesa Verde, they're very dramatic at Bears Ears. There are two kiva ladder petroglyphs, almost full size at Bears Ears. The Citadel, Bears Ears, was on the cover of the November National Geographic. This image with a long, I think, 24-hour time exposure. So we're going to get a lot more people this summer, I'm sure. Once you get out to the edge of this, there's things to see on the way. And then there are these granaries. So these are not habitation sites. These are places where food was stored. This is what not to do. And you don't see this at Mesa Verde. You don't see artifacts, sherds, lithics in one place. This is nicknamed a museum rock. You don't want this to happen. People will say, I'll just take one. I'll just take one. So when I see this, I scatter them, bury them, close by. You just don't want people to be tempted. Another one of my fabulous favorite sites. This is called Bullseye Ruin or Inscription House. The room, and you see it on the left with the little bits of white remaining, white paint remaining, is one of the oldest in all of Bears Ears. I think it dates to like 650 AD when everybody else was still in pit houses. So that's really exciting. So again, inaccessible, can't get to it, but there's a way to get really great photos of it. And this is exciting. So they had a ladder to get up. And if you look closely below the doorway, you can see on that ledge, there are some places where the rock has been incised, inscribed. So a ladder would be less liable to move. Well, get this, that's the top. Now look at the bottom. Look, they actually carved in the rock little holes to support that ladder for more stability. Pretty amazing. Sandals, brand new dissertation by Ben Bellarado, who works at Crow Canyon, about sandals and sandal types and sandal culture. Pretty exciting. Lots of spirals. There's spirals and glyphs at Mesa Verde, many of them at Bears Ears in the rock art. And then lots of canyons, lots of places to hike and go. Water in the spring from snowmelt, although we're in a drought, a very serious drought, and pretty amazing places. So if you look in the lower right, this was one of my great adventures, climbing into that. Photographing it was scary enough. To actually be on that ledge was amazing. And so that's what we saw. About 6 of us decided to try and make the attempt. And that was where we were going. So once we found it, we had to figure out a way to get down canyon to get into it. Didn't see any footprints. Nobody had been there in a long time. Here is the approach. Notice the angle, notice the loose rocks, whether they're there by nature or there because they were put there. It was like little ball bearings. So you had to look down. You had to pay attention to everywhere you stepped, which meant that if you were an archer defending this site, and it's obviously defensive architecture, you could easily get an arrow in the chest. And so I was never so happy as when I finally made it off this little piece of a ledge to get behind that defensive wall and actually get in the habitation room with the Mesa Verde style T-shaped door. Oh my goodness, I felt so secure. I felt so comfortable, but it wasn't as far as we were going. We had more to go. And so that's what it took. You can't even stand up. You have to crawl around that ledge. So I'm doing it with 2 cameras, bandolier style, terrified. My whole, nervous system is shot. My heart is thumping. I'm really worried and scared. I finally crawl around a corner where I can sit back, and I get out of my binoculars to try and, bring my pulse down. And I start looking at the ravens and I say, well, they're not that far away. Well, that's because I'm using binoculars. I'm trying to fool myself. So this was quite a scary thing to do, but we made it. We made it all the way around the edge and found this beautiful 2-tone painted structure with that and with an intact door. Is that amazing? And building materials still here that weren't used. And then the little bit of the ledge ends right there. Another rare in the Bears Ears area, roofless kiva, with a view from the kiva way out in the far shadow out there. It's a Navajo mountain. And so I'm going to say goodbye with that slide and turn it over for any questions that Monica will hopefully direct.
Well, thank you, Andy. I was getting vertigo just looking at those photos. Did your life flash before your eyes?
Sort of. I was more concerned about loose rock, actually, but it was a momentous adventure, and it really made me think about the Ancestral Puebloans and this period of the cliff dwellings. And that's what Bears Ears and Mesa Verde shares, is that 150 years between 1150 and 1300, when everyone went into the cliffs, and why they did it and how difficult it was. And then then they moved on.
And despite the treacherous location of that dwelling, you had highlighted in one of the last few photos that there was the two-tone painted surface.
Yeah.
So despite the death-defying heights, they're like, we still need to make it nice.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Wow. Well, that was incredible, Andy. Thank you. I know I enjoyed seeing some of the dwellings, specifically the one where it had the lunar calendar or the lunar symbolism. That was
Right.
really interesting.
Right.
And just the overall, you made it sound so simple. The whole bear's ears, something that's so complex, disputed history and what's still happening presently. You made it so easy to understand. So thank you for walking us through that. I'm going to open up the questions and answers now. So if you have anything, please just put it in the chat box and I'd be delighted to pass this on to Andy. We're just getting some nice feedback, really terrific. Thanks to everyone, especially Andy. Andy, I know I have a question because you do so much between your own tours, what you do at Fort Lewis College, the Mesa Verde Foundation. How long did it come to put this book together?
Oh, this was 20 years.
Oh, okay.
You start on something and you're not sure where it's going to go. And we have a house in Bluff, Utah. We're there all the time. And I knew I was going to write something about the county, but it wasn't until the monument was actually declared that I realized, that was the theme, that was the focus. And then the problem was writing 11,000 years of history, doing justice to Navajo people, justice to the Utes, trying to understand Mormon settlement, Mormon ideas of sacredness in the landscape. So that's why it took a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, especially with the rock art, because it's very different. I'm down here in the Verde Valley of Arizona, so our rock art is quite different. We have a lot of Hopi clan symbolism, and you can really see the difference. Okay, wonderful. We have some questions coming in. This is Jean and Polly Reitz. The term Anasazi has been discredited by some. Why do you still use it?
First off, it's still used by the Navajos. It's a Navajo word. And so in my chapter on the Navajos, I use it the way they use it. I'm quoting from them and I'm spelling it the way they spell it. It is used in that sort of, the reference in my talk was the Kayenta Anasazi as an ethnic group. If that group has a new name, I'm not familiar with it. The Hopi name for folks who came before is Hisatsanom. So the nomenclature is still sort of in flux. Puebloan itself is Spanish. So I'm sure in another decade we'll have other names, but right now at Mesa Verde, the peoples who were here are called Ancestral Puebloans. That's the phrase I use. That's the phrase I teach. But Anasazi is a historic term too. It's a Navajo term. That means, actually translated, it means enemy's ancestors, but it's enemy apostrophe S. So it's possessive. So that meant for the Navajo that their enemies, the Puebloan people, it's the ancestors of the Puebloan people. So that's why the phrase isn't used at Mesa Verde National Park. It's still used by Navajo scholars. And, there have been archaeologists argue in print that it's historic. So we'll see where it goes in another decade.
Okay, thank you. This is from Seth Bradley. How does one get into Bear's Ears to see it and explore it?
Well, I would start with other sites that you're familiar with. Bear's Ears requires a four-wheel drive vehicle. You may need to spend the night either on purpose or accidentally. So full camping gear, water, sleeping bag, tent. We do have a Bear's Ears Education Center in Bluff There are a lot of nice little day trips from Bluff. You can get there from Blanding, Utah. Great motels in Blanding. There's a campground on Highway 95 at Comb Wash that has pit toilets and some pretty well-used picnic tables. So there's lots of ways that we don't really have a good map. The best map I recommend is the National Geographic Illustrated, or I'm sorry, National Geographic Trails Illustrated Cedar Mesa Grand Gulch map. Foldable, waterproof, that's where you start. And then there's different San Juan County roads to drive. But you probably start, because it's winter, things are going to be drier, lower. So I'd start with the Bears Ears Education Center, but I'm not sure it's even open till spring. So you really have to plan your trip.
Okay, and we have a comment from Andrew Reed. Wonderful introduction to Bears Ears, and thank you for sharing it with us. Can't wait to read your book and begin to fill in the gaps. I have a question, Andy, with all of these sites, the acreage and everything, and the lack of rangers and I guess just supervision with the territory of Bears Ears. Is there anything from a cultural preservation standpoint with monitoring the sites or the rock art against vandalism?
Well, so yeah, that is the $64 question. Can we have an outdoor museum?
Mm-hmm.
Can we have this much space with so little law enforcement or even interpretive rangers? And the answer will be in part determined by the 5 tribes. So the management plan is still happening. Unfortunately, it's threatened by these legal issues related to the monument itself. So I think it'll take a while to work this all out. I don't think there'll be any new roads, but there's plenty of roads. And the real question is, can people respect these sites? One of the biggest problems is the internet. The problem is people who have a good time, post things, post photographs, have, way markers, have GPS coordinates. That's a very difficult issue. Trying to deal with preserving prehistory in a digital age when folks want to show off where they went on their vacation. And I just don't know how to deal with that effectively. And we're hoping for tribal guidance.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, it's many discussions to be had.
Right.
This is a question from Barbara Stone following up regarding vandalism. Can trailer cams be used to monitor for vandalism?
They can. There are motion activated cameras at Canyons of the Ancients and at Hovenweep. I know that's possible, but there's also the notion of what's an intrusion, and what kind of a visitor experience do we really want to have? I'm not happy with some of the protective fencing at some of the sites because I think it's too much. It's just too visible. So one of the issues that Bears Ears has that Mesa Verde doesn't have is cows. Mesa Verde has feral horses. I mean, it's got its own issue, but cattle are regularly part of the national monument. And so how to keep the cows out to allow visitor entry, it's going to take some interesting planning.
Thank you. And thank you, Barbara, for your question. I have just a few more for Andy, unless we have some viewers that would like to type something in the chat box. And it's just something that you've been working on this book for decades. So like everyone else, I can't wait to, at the end of this webinar, to order my copy on Amazon. Everyone's going to get it as a stocking stuffer.
You're going to need a big stocking.
I guess so. But, Andy, I'd like to personally thank you because I know you as a board member, as a friend, but also the work that you do. You're the first non-native person decades and decades ago to really talk about true stewardship, not only with the land, but with artifacts, objects, and the culture. So I commend you just for everything you do for Native peoples.
Yes, that book is still in print, University Press of Colorado. It's called Sacred Objects and Sacred Places. And my goal was to help the historic preservation community know about tribal sites. I was honored to have photographs, including the cover photograph on President Clinton's report to Congress on the need for funding for tribal preservation. States have SHPOs, state historic preservation officers. Tribes have THPOs, tribal historic preservation officers. And Fort Lewis College, where I teach, we have free tuition for Native American students. We have students from many, many tribes. We have over 100 students who come just from Alaska. We have Native Alaskan students. And so we have a cultural heritage concentration in the history department. And it's really exciting where those students intern and where they are placed. So thank you, Monica, for that comment.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you. Seth Bradley wants to know, what's the full title of your new book about Bears Ears?
So, great question. The title is Bears Ears: Landscape of Refuge and Resistance. And the reason that it's got the subtitle is even in the ancestral Puebloan world, Bears Ears was on the edge. It was the northwest edge. If sort of Chaco and Mesa Verde are closer to the center, Bears Ears was on the edge. It was a place of refuge, and the architecture speaks to that. But it was also a place of resistance. It was a place where prehistoric people stayed and resisted change around them. Certainly, if you're building structures on small cliff ledges, you're resisting. And then the Navajos who came, the Utes who came, are going to be resisting Anglo incursions. When the Mormons get there in 1881, they're going to be resisting Anglo and governmental interference all the way through the establishment of the Forest Service. And then in many ways, even up to the establishment of Bears Ears itself. So it's a very remote area. And yet the history, my goodness, it took me 15 chapters. There are fascinating stories. There are the Alice Eastwood, the botanist. There was a community of boy, I don't know what to call them, that their own sort of religious group in the 1930s that was out there. There are famous people who disappeared in Bears Ears. There's a couple of murders that happened. So the human history is just extraordinary, and yet it's such a big, big area. And President Obama's declaration at 1.35 million acres, that takes a lot of time to explore it and understand it. And my book is not it's not a guidebook. There are plenty of those out there. It's really a history of the area. And those two words, refuge and resistance. The Mormon families who were there resisted the attempt to end polygamy. And when polygamy is no longer accepted as legal, some of those families go to Mexico. So it's really an interesting place.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in for the last webinar of this year. And I'm going to pass it over to Shannon to conclude the event.
Sure. Well, thank you, Monica. And thank you, Dr. Gulliford. We appreciate it very much. And then I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. We always appreciate your support we love to tell the story of the people and the places. So we are just really grateful that you're willing to let us tell the story. Thank you, and have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. And we'll be excited to see you in January when Monica will be speaking. And I guess I'll be moderating, although I don't think Monica needs much of that. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day and enjoy the rest of this year.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.